Well, hello, everybody. Sorry for that slight delay. As I said on Twitter, this was actually a Monday masquerading as a Tuesday, at least in the US, with Memorial Day yesterday. But today, this is the Cube by Example Insider Show. I'm Langdon White. It's been a while. I'm a faculty member over at Boston University, and I host this show. And we talk to insiders in the Kubernetes community. That was a lot to say fast. And try to give you some insights about what's going on in that community so that you can kind of get a sense of what will be landing soon in the Kubernetes world. Because we find that with the open source projects in particular, it's very helpful if we can get a sense of what people are doing versus what they're thinking they're going to do, so that that gives a better sense of what might be happening soon. So I'd like to welcome my co-host today, Josh Berkus. And if you want to quickly introduce yourself, that would be great.
Howdy, everybody. I'm Josh Berkus. I work in the Red Hat Open Source Practice Office, where I support Kubernetes and other cloud-native projects. And so I'm a little familiar with today's guests. So let's actually have them introduce themselves. Ramon, you want to go first?
Hey everyone, Ramon Roman Nissen here, product manager for the migration toolkit for applications in Red Hat, and also a maintainer within the Konveyor community.
John?
Hey, John Matthews, based out of Raleigh, North Carolina, Red Hatter. I handle a lot of engineering management things for Konveyor.
Okay, and Savitha?
Hey everyone, my name is Savitha Raghunathan and I am a senior software engineer at Red Hat and I am one of the Konveyor maintainers and I also contribute to Kubernetes. And I'm happy to be here as a guest again.
Yeah, Savitha kind of goes back and forth. Depends, sometimes she's a guest, sometimes she's a host. The other one that is that keeps throwing me, especially on the lead up to this show, is John Matthews is also the name of the department head of my computer science program when I was in college, and so it's I keep seeing it and saying, "Wait, what?" So it's kind of random. Cool. But can you tell us a little bit, just for kind of some context, what is Konveyor exactly?
I guess I can take this one. Well, Konveyor is a toolkit. It's a community. It got started as a community. It was an umbrella community in which we wanted to focus on helping organizations with the onboarding of applications to Kubernetes. So helping them not only bring their legacy traditional workloads into Kubernetes, but also help them leverage the capabilities of Kubernetes as a platform. That's the elevator pitch for Konveyor.
Right. Yeah. So Konveyor is actually pretty well covered by Cube by Example. There's actually a learning path, and we'll probably throw the link in the chat at some point soon. But that there's a lot of kind of material there. But I guess one of the things that I kind of like to try to understand is like, okay, what does that mean? Like, so I have, I've kind of recently installed Kubernetes, or something, right? And I have now this roadmap that some consulting organization put together for me. Speaking as a former person who used to do that, that has a product roadmap, and it's all going to magically move over to Kubernetes and everything will be perfect and hunky dory. But so what do you like? What does it mean to try to migrate those applications? Is it? I presume it's not a 5-second deal.
Definitely not. So we're not trying to do magic here. At least magic doesn't exist, at least just yet. I mean, we have AI in the horizon. We'll see in some years. But right now, I don't think there is any magic. Well, what we're trying to do with Konveyor is to provide as many insights for these architects that are leading this type of migration engagements, migration initiatives, giving them the insights to make informed decisions, so they have something tangible in which they can base their decisions. And on the other hand, for the developers that are performing the changes in the source code, that are adapting those applications to run on the new platform, provide some guidance and some degree of automation as well. We're not currently targeting or focusing on full automation, because I don't think something like that exists just yet. It's just about providing these insights for the lead practitioners, for the lead architects that are steering the migration initiative, and then for the ones performing the changes, automation and guidance.
And so how does one decide about like like I think one of the fundamental challenges or problems or whatever you want to call it with kind of migrating into Kubernetes is that the architecture of an application that kind of lives in a containerized world versus the architecture of an application that lives on a big iron VM. How do we know what to do? Is it do we need to re-architect the application? Do we need to move it? Do we just kind of port it somehow? What do we know to do there?
Yeah, the idea that we have, or the value that we provide with the tooling that we have, is that we are able to find anti-patterns for containerization in the application. So we provide very precise data of what will be required for the application to run on containers, and then it's up for the organization, for these architects to decide whether they want to re-architect for whatever business reason, or if they want to just port this application to the cloud with the less amount of changes required. What we're trying to do is, empower these individuals to make these informed decisions from actual data coming from the applications. We find the anti-patterns, and it's up to you to decide whether it's worth to re-architect the whole thing, or if you would prefer to just keep it as it is and then focus your resources and your budgeting on something else.
So what are some reasons? What are some of these anti-patterns? What are some reasons why somebody wouldn't be able
can we have
to
some
containerize
examples?
stuff?
Yeah.
For example, one big thing is configuration management. Application lifecycle management in general it's a very interesting topic to take into account when you're containerizing and bringing applications into Kubernetes, especially. So trying to find anti-patterns in configuration management, like loading configuration files from the file system, all that type of stuff that needs to be taken into account when you're containerizing the application, when you are bringing it to Kubernetes with the de facto default configuration model that applications will have in Kubernetes with config maps, secrets. Just having that information, maybe there are ways of somehow fixing this thing, or having a practical solution for this without that many changes, or maybe changing something like that will have a huge impact on the application architecture. It's just about surfacing all these things for you to make these decisions.
So you're saying that like one of the anti-patterns is people have stuff set up with lifecycle management with configuration with say Puppet, right? And Puppet is deploying applications and changing them in place. What's the problem there?
No, the problem would be that, for example, old school applications that have application configuration embedded within the application itself, or an old pattern for enterprise enterprise architectures, enterprise applications of having application servers deployed in multiple hosts, and then all of them accessing a common NFS with all the configuration files. Those things will need to be tweaked somehow for the application to run properly within containers. Other things will be, for example, things like clustering. Maybe your application has some custom clustering mechanism, maybe on the cache level or something like that, like using multicast or anything like that, that is not compatible with Kubernetes. Those are the things, that you would need to take into account when bringing those applications into containers. Also, things like my applications is writing on the file system because it used the file system as a means to connect, to integrate with other applications across a business pipeline or of some nature. That type of stuff. What we try to detect alongside some other modernization concerns. Like upgrading from a certain app server to another one that is more suitable for the cloud. We also cover that thing because the analysis engine that we use has some sort of tradition on that space as well, and we have inherited that with the Konveyor project as well.
Okay, so stuff like, for that matter, stuff like using a Unix socket is obviously going to be.
For example.
Yeah, it's funny, like we have all these kind of like relatively old school ways of doing kind of various workarounds that you can manage inside like a virtual machine, and then you move it into any kind of containerized environment and all sorts of stuff starts falling apart. And what I find it really similar to in the old days when there was a lot of migrations kind of to the cloud, right? And there was a lot of security concerns, right? Of how do we migrate for our data center to the cloud or whatever, and they were worried about open like network access, right? And what I was most of the time when I found as a consultant was that, oh, hey, by the way, once you moved it to the cloud, lots of stuff broke because it was so much more secure than your data center, which had 5,000 open ports because people had punched ports through, for some sort of communication protocol over the years, and it had gotten lost, and it just kind of kept happening, right? So I find a lot of when you're looking at these migrations, a lot of the times people don't even realize that they're using some of those features that are not actually all that secure, even on a virtual machine, right?
Well,
and you kind of find these things when you're trying to migrate.
Well, also some practices change, right? Because
True.
if you're assuming all of your applications are going to live on the same physical machine, then sharing information via configuration files and Unix sockets is actually a more secure approach, right? If
As
they are all
long
on the
as
same physical machine, right?
right.
It's
As
just
soon as you get
that
into VMs, though, it starts getting messy, right?
Yeah. Well, no, as soon as you move into cloud, period, right? You suddenly can't do that anymore, and you have to find a new way to secure everything.
Right. Right.
So I wanted to actually change tacks a little bit, which is y'all recently announced version 0.1 of Konveyor. And I wanted to ask, what's in version 0.1? You seem to be starting with an unambitiously low number for this release, and so I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about that.
I could talk a little bit about some of the context. Some of it was we're trying to set the right precedent where we don't come out too aggressive, have a 1.0, and then all of a sudden we realize in 6 months the APIs have to drastically change. So a lot of this is going out where, as Ramon was mentioning, we inherited some of the technology that's been out for several years. A project called Windup that does some Java analysis and other pieces, and we've had a lot of things kind of baked. But when it comes down to the platform and the APIs, we didn't feel confident enough that they weren't going to change at all. So we really wanted to come out with a 0.1 so we had some flexibility on the API surface. And that's essentially what we're doing now, as especially we start looking into future integrations. There's some work that's going on where IBM Research has a lot of cool things that we're looking to leverage and bring in, and we're not sure what's the right API surface to do that with. So the 0.1 just kind of signaled to the community that there's stuff here with APIs. We're still trying to figure out the right surface.
Cool. So do we have new folks from IBM involved in the project now?
Well, there's a few efforts that have been going on for probably about 2 years with IBM Research doing the different, some of it's working on the AI side, some of it's working to move to Cube, some of it's working on test generation, some pieces of taking a monolith and trying to break that out and then use AI to find different pieces. A lot of experiments that are going to go into what we now call a conveyor ecosystem. So there's the conveyor itself, which is the platform, and then there's a conveyor ecosystem where it's a lot of experiments that are going through that as they mature will get plugged back into the platform.
Yeah, I thought I kind of noticed today. I don't think I'd seen it before that IBM Research is actually a sponsor of the project, like directly, which was kind of a interesting, to try to use kind of those AI techniques to approach it. I think that kind of leads us a little bit into kind of a little bit the structure of Konveyor, right? Is that it's sort of I'm going to kind of put this loosely, but it's sort of kind of like an overall application, right? Which then has a bunch of plugins that kind of do all the various types of work. Is that an accurate, or is that a fair assessment, or do you refer to it that way? I know it's a bunch of different tools and then one kind of one to rule them all, in case you had a one ring, for example. Does that make sense, or can you elaborate on that?
See who wants to.
I think I can do this one. So I would say the core of the user experience is what we call the hub, the Konveyor hub. And the hub mainly consists on a application portfolio centric approach. So basically, everything emanates from the application portfolio, for what we call the application inventory, and then what we have is a series of add-ons that provide additional value, and basically are looking into surfacing information about the application portfolio, or maybe enhancing the application portfolio in some way. So right now, for example, we have the analysis add-on that will be able to analyze your application source code and binaries and provide reports on what needs to be done, and also surface information about the technology stack of each application. We have the assessment module that will give you a high-level overview of all the different concerns that need to be taken into account when you are trying to containerize, to modernize your application. It's a questionnaire-driven assessment. And then we're working on new add-ons for the future, things like migration waves management, things like test generation. I think John already mentioned that. It's just keeping everything fully focused on the application inventory, because that's what we are targeting here. We're targeting and we're working with an application inventory, and then have different blockable pieces that either surface information about that or perform a certain action against the application inventory.
I gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. So we actually had a question from the audience. What kind of, who are you seeing kind of contributing to the project or being involved in the project that are not IBM and Red Hat? Like, what other communities are you seeing getting involved?
Savitha, you want to take this one?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So we are seeing a lot of engagement from people trying up the project, and we recently had few participants who join our community meetings. It's not like as a company, like we are seeing individuals from various companies and consultancies, and we also have someone trying to create a customization to the existing assessment module right now. And I think they would be presenting in one of the community meetings soon. So we are seeing engagement, and we are hoping that there are some collaborations that's happening with other companies too, regarding the contribution of language analyzer. So our language analyzer is a plugin. The new one that we are developing is a plugin. So you can bring in your own languages and plug into the analyzer that we have, and that will provide you support for the language that you're plugging into. For example, if you have a .NET or a Python, whatever, and if that has a language server, and that can be plugged into our analyzer engine, and that gives you all the details that you are like, and it is also powered through rules. So you need to have some rules for that engine to work really well. So we are seeing engagement for all those things from other places, other companies. For example, I know I'm just gonna call out on Ramon and just say, like, I know he was talking with some folks in Microsoft regarding that. Sorry, Ramon, I'm just throwing you under the bus right now. So there are like interesting things happening, yeah.
Well, the thing is that, Microsoft has been contributing to the rules side of things in the analyzer. So they've been contributing to this engine that we, the former engine, the one that we inherited. They have been contributing rules for Azure, several Azure flavors. We would love to have more involvement on their side, but we're just working on that. We are shooting at everyone. So the one thing to clarify, Konveyor has become a CNCF sandbox project. It's definitely not a marketing gimmick from Red Hat and IBM. We want this thing to become a true open source community. And what we're trying to do is engage all vendors, GSIs, and organizations out there. We're still a young project. I mean, we became sandbox, I think, in October, something like that. We announced that. Maybe we got the certification before that, but we were able to announce that in October, November. So it's taking time. Before, there were some other vendors that were saying, hey, this thing you are doing, guys, is very interesting, but since it's still your thing, we are kind of frenemies here, so we will better, we will prefer to wait until this thing is owned by the CNCF, so it becomes, something community driven, and we ensure that it's not a Red Hat thing. I can assure you it isn't anymore, and that we're trying to do is basically define the standards for Kubernetes adoption.
And I want to add a little bit more to what Ramon said. When I used to be a platform engineer, and there was no one project that actually helped. So I did a lot of Java modernization. Like, I help people do the Java modernization, and there was no easy way. Either you rewrite the application, the developer is always busy. So this time at KubeCon, right? KubeCon EU at Amsterdam, we had a kiosk for Konveyor. Thanks to CNCF for having us there. So there is a project pavilion where all the CNCF projects get to have a kiosk, and they can talk about the projects. This time we did have a kiosk, and we were able to spread awareness about the project, and there were so many folks who are actually interested in what we are doing right now. They are in need of that, and they're like, oh my god, we just come to know, like, they are like, oh, this is Konveyor, this is a new project, and every project around that area has something to do with the infrastructure, right? Like app definition, application build, or like infrastructure management, something of that kind. And they were like, oh, tell me about your project. We are seeing your demo that is going through the loop, and tell us more about it. So it was really cool to see, like, so many people are going through this movement of where they have the projects, applications, and they want to modernize it. So it was really nice to see that engagement from folks at KubeCon. So we are hoping that the next time we would have like more and more things and engagement, and create more awareness, and more people contribute to the project.
I actually remember when you all were applying to the CNCF, there was some talk about actually having a project that was going to be attractive to independent consultants, since those are often involved in migration efforts.
And that's something I guess we put that to test at KubeCon. And there were many consulting organizations that approached us, and some of them were saying, hey, we're already using this thing, this is so cool. And some of them were like, we weren't aware of something like this existing out there. We're about to get started as soon as we can. So it feels like we are in a space that there wasn't that much. I mean, I don't think there are other migration tools out there, but they create some degree of locking to a certain vendor. I mean, each vendor has its own migration tools, but the resulting, a scenario creates some degree of locking with some proprietary technologies. And what we're trying to do with Konveyor is to keep it as vendor free as possible, as upstream as possible. If you want to use whatever capabilities of this distribution of Kubernetes, so be it. But the tool itself will remain, generic on that space, and won't get into that. Yeah, we got very good reception from these consulting organizations, GSIs, so on and so forth.
I actually want to interrupt. Waleed had a question that actually echoes something that I was wondering about, which is, so right now the application assessment is questionnaire driven. Are there plans to eventually add plugins so that some of this assessment can be sort of code scan driven for various application platforms? That is, like, if somebody's using Spring or they're using Django or something else, that there can actually be a plugin that scans the application and tells you everything you're going to need to change.
Oh yeah, that's what we do in the analysis module. That's exactly what the analysis module is. Okay. So assessment, questionnaire driven. It's a high level. It's like the intro discussion with certain stakeholders within the organization to try to understand the application landscape. So we call landscape like the application architecture, lifecycle management, technology stack, processes, licensing, everything that needs to be taken into account when you are containerizing, when you're modernizing the application. That's the assessment, just to have a rough idea of what will be required. And then once you have that idea and you want to dig deeper, then you run the analysis. And in the end, the analysis, what it does is that it finds anti-patterns in the source code that might be preventing the application from running on the target platform that you have selected. So we have, this analysis engine is in essence a rules engine, and the rules contain those anti-patterns, these issues that we're looking for. And what we do is run the analysis against the application, find issues, and those issues also come with what we call story points that give you an idea of the effort required to perform the changes that are depicted on these issues. So we go down that route. We go down to the source code level, but right now our engine only supports Java applications. So we are working on a next generation analysis engine that will have support for any language out there that has a language server.
I was actually going to comment on that really quickly. It's interesting that using the language server, and I think Microsoft invented them. I'm not sure.
Yes.
Yeah, but so, I swear they've been such a huge benefit as kind of having this generic way of like better understanding various languages. Yeah, Visual Studio kind of, is a driving force, but it's like been all of these different interesting kind of methods for integrating with it. Where does the language server come into play for Konveyor? Like, I kind of understand loosely, but kind of in a little bit more detail, in the sense, like, if I decided I want to sit down and write a Haskell, plugin for Konveyor, like, and there's a language server out there. I have actually no idea if there is, but where does it kind of fit in? Is it just kind of one aspect, or can I kind of feed a large amount of the analysis into something tool like that?
Yes, that's new work that's going on right now. We're trying to get a early release, probably in about a month or two. We have a happy path that uses this language server protocol, and it's work
Okay.
that's been going on for, I don't know, call about maybe 6 months, somewhere around that. The way that we're doing that is we're creating a new component that's called an analyzer LSP. Think of the analyzer LSP, as Ramon's mentioning, as a rules engine. So you have the rules engine there. We create the syntax. This is going to be in YAML. Talks to you about different things it's trying to find. And then there is a language provider component to it. And language provider component, that's the thing that could leverage a language server implementation or something else. So we have one for Java, which I believe is placed on Eclipse. And then we're looking into one right now for .NET that would use OmniSharp. But if you want one for Haskell, you would take that existing language server and you'd wrap it in a small little provider, and that integrates into our engine. And then from that, the nice thing about it is you get all the other integrations with it. So we have the application inventory, which is essentially the same. It's the central thing you'd be interacting with. That would have the violations, the issues, all that kind of information. So essentially, you take your small component of your language server protocol, you would stitch that into the analyzer LSP, and then what you're responsible for is how do you do the changes between what we have as a rule and what an LSP query is. And that's essentially the piece that you would write. We were trying to choose that because we didn't want to have to go through and write all our own AST parsers and start going into stuff where it would be a huge investment. So the theory was we invest most of our time into creating the rules engine. We have a small little kind of shimmish layer that could do the translation from a rules engine to LSP syntax. And then with that, we were hoping we could leverage a lot of other things in the community.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I was kind of I think it's really interesting, and I like the kind of the plugin model of kind of thinking about some of these problems. I think one of the things, and maybe this is part of what you're thinking about here, but in a sense, a language has more differences, right, than the language. It's like the way you approach developing Java software, right, is quite different than the way you approach developing Python software, whether it be kind of, even if they have all other aspects are being equal, they could be exactly the same goal, right, but you're going to approach it quite differently if you're doing it Python than if you're doing it in Java. Even if you do multiple compiled languages, C# versus Java is actually even going to have some pretty significant architectural differences if you are deeply into those languages. So I think that's a really good thing to be careful of. I did want to ask a little bit more, because I'm a little bit biased, but the kind of AI tooling that you've been messing around with to try to solve for some of these problems. Are you looking at like AI tooling around identifying how to do a migration, or something else, or like I'm not
Sure, I
like,
can
can you
talk a little
elaborate
about
on
that.
that a little?
Yeah, so this is very early stages. Early stages to the point that I've been spending probably about the past 6 weeks, almost all my free time going deep into the space and trying to go through Coursera certs and other kinds of things, going into deep learning. The pattern that I think we have available to us is if you throw AI out and you just look at what's Konveyor doing right now, Konveyor is going through and it's helping people to understand issues. It is working on a pattern where once you find issues, you get to see those same things repeated in multiple flavors of applications, but it's the same problem essentially that people have to scale out. When we look at all of that, it lends itself to a point that we already have a learn loop built into the system. We have folks that are going through and doing the hard piece initially to find out the rules engine, other things of anti patterns. And then you get to the point where you scale this out of actually making the source code changes. We don't, there's essentially a thing here where the magic of how this works, people are starting to do manually when you go through an engagement, where you have an architect that finds the first one, starts going through. By the time it scales out to the developers making changes, it's almost repeatable changes that they know about.
Hmm.
That's the first phase where I think we could tap into the AI. I don't think the AI is going to do something of magic where it's going to look at two different kinds of applications and know immediately what all the right changes are, unless someone else trained it and showed what's happening. And I think we have an ability to play with this because built into the system, someone's already doing that. We're already going through, we're looking at the source code, we know what the problems are, we're flagging them through the rules engine, and then a developer will take that knowledge and they make their source code changes, commit it back into the repo. And they're doing that repetitive thing of very similar problems as they scale out. So this can go to hundreds of applications. That's where I'm looking to see what can we do to leverage that on against some kind of model. The next piece that goes into this is I'm fascinated with Hugging Face. Just the ability of all these things you can do with open source models is amazing. And then just seeing what happens on the speed of how the innovations are coming through, it feels like there's a piece there that if we can leverage something in open source side of leveraging these models of Hugging Face, I think I can do something on the NLP side to bring it back in so we can find essentially the changes that are going through. Can we mine that and get extract them out and then be able to apply them automatically? This is all very aggressive and it's very new, but that's something that we're starting to look into and see what we can play with.
One thing you were kind of saying, which I would kind of, I'm not sure if this is quite where you're getting at, but I was kind of thinking about this, is that almost like, if you can kind of keep Konveyor involved through the full migration process, and then can kind of capture what they did when they migrated, right? And then use
100%.
that as a feedback loop, right? Yeah, that's
100%. Yeah.
really
And
interesting. Yeah.
exactly, you totally have. And we have that now because when we have that inventory, we have access to all the source code. So we're
Mhm.
constantly monitoring that. So we can run our analysis scans. We have the rules engine that's built in. So we have all those pieces. The things that we're lacking is how can we make it even easier for developers to go ahead and apply the changes?
Yeah, so sorry, quick. Somebody commented another shout out to Hugging Face. We actually use Hugging Face in as like a recommended tool in a bunch of our ML classes, because as Waleed says, it's kind of democratizing generative AI. So definitely check it out. I threw the link in the chat in case people are interested.
Although,
But yeah, sorry.
okay, no, sorry, I was going to get off into left field because I'm like, wait, is generative AI actually the right approach for this?
Maybe not,
But
right? I mean, but it's kind of although Hugging Face actually does it does other kinds of AI besides
okay,
generative, right?
Yeah, I think
As
the
I
basic
recall.
concept, what we're doing here is that we're already scanning the source code and we have a rules
mhm.
engine right now that's essentially static code analysis. The second phase of this would be that after somebody has already done the work, we have the commits of what they already did, their source code changes in the repo. Can we take that out and mine it and then start using that as the next phase when somebody goes to do a similar kind of problem in that? So it's not going to be something that would be like groundbreaking where it can learn on its own and start recommending things it's never seen. It's more of a case if we've already seen these commits that come in, can we learn from that and then apply that towards future ones?
There's something I would like to add just before anyone gets nervous. Right now, we are not reporting back those insights. It's not like we are stealing insight from your migrations or anything like that. Any organization out there can rest assured that we are not gathering or mining any data from their application source code. We're just figuring things out for the long-term future, but we're definitely not there just yet. And if something like that were to happen, of course, we will need, someone agreeing that information to be fed back to the main model. But so far, we're not doing anything like that because I know, security, how things are and how nervous organizations might be about some stuff about their applications being revealed to the larger open source community. So right now, everything is fully secured. There is no telemetry back telling anything about your application portfolio to anyone.
So, I was actually going to ask a question that would lead to that answer if you hadn't brought it up. But yeah, that is a common concern. One of the things, it is actually a security problem to even kind of understand like the layout of the servers in your environment, right? So, we want to be really cautious about how things like migrations happen and how applications are deployed. Kind of in general, even though it is a good piece of shared information, you've got to be really kind of cautious about how much detail you get into about that particular instance from a security perspective. I was going to go a little bit kind of left field here, which you haven't really mentioned, but have you or are you have a lot of stuff in this space that you need to do, right? But have you started to think about some of the more unusual or new aspects of kind of Kubernetes computing in general, but also kind of cloud native computing or event-driven architectures, et cetera, and thought about things like when you're doing these migrations, identifying opportunities for things like WASM or serverless functions, or so you're not just kind of moving a website over. You might also be saying, hey, these backend components or this API layer may be better suited as a set of serverless functions, or this whole UI might be better performant if you did it as a WASM design or something. Have you started looking at that stuff yet?
There are some things in the future like service mesh, things like that, distributed tracing. There are some discussions on that space, but I gotta tell you, the main appetite out there is just what do I do with my legacy portfolio? That might not be the most exciting for all techno geeks that like this kind of stuff. But for large organizations, their main concern is that, hey, I have a gazillion applications in here that are running on legacy infrastructure, on legacy servers, on legacy technologies that I don't know what to do anymore. I have like 5 different operating models across my portfolio. I would like to unify things. Maybe I have my greenfield applications already running on Kubernetes. I'm just experiencing the advantages on that firsthand. How could I get the same stuff or at least something similar for these other 800, 1,000, 5,000 applications that I have on my portfolio? So right now, what we're doing is basically satisfying the demand from the field of figuring out what to do with these traditional applications still running on traditional infrastructure.
Right.
So that's actually, I was going to say that, but that actually leads to a follow-up in Langdon's question right here, which is obviously there's going to be a lot of, hey, we want to know the minimal changes required to make these run on Kubernetes, right? Are you getting anybody, among the users and that sort of thing saying, hey, I also want something to recommend changes to take advantage of the new platform, right? Because obviously, if you're doing minimal changes, you're not actually gaining anything by moving to Kubernetes, except not needing to maintain the old infrastructure. The gain all comes from, hey, can I take this thing that say used to be a code loop pulling the socket and turn it into a listener on an event stream instead?
Right.
Or take this thing that used to be this custom SFTP call and turn it into an open API interface. Is anybody asking about that at this stage, or are they just all too wrapped up in a just, how do we get off of our old homebrew Cloud Foundry, whatever it is, platform that they don't want to maintain anymore?
Yeah, we get requests on those topics from time to time, but right now I gotta tell you that the main focus and the main request that we get is, what on earth do I do with this thing that I have, with these gazillion applications that I have? I want to have this unified operating model. As we move forward, as we progress, we're getting some of these requests, but we need to bear in mind that the Konveyor project itself, the engineering team that is currently contributing to that, they are experts in building enterprise class tools, but they're not that much of an expert of migrating applications. So that's why we want to set up this migration experience user group for people from consulting organizations, from vendors that have been involved in this type of modernization engagements, to share raw knowledge that can then be translated into rules that our rules engines can use, and also set the priorities on what is the next best thing that we need to take care in this migration modernization space. So far, we've discussed things like service mesh, for example, and that kind of relates to what you were saying, Josh. If you're talking about service mesh, then you have to get rid about things like circuit breaking source code in your application, anything related to routing, logging, distributed tracing. All that stuff needs to go away. So this will be the next step. Once my application is in here, what should I do next? So with this kind of scenarios or migration paths, we are trying to tackle the more advanced user, those who are still maybe doing microservices or modern distributed applications, maybe on other platforms, Cloud Foundry maybe, and that they want to take advantage of Kubernetes. They're thinking about, again, service mesh or enhancing their distributed tracing. I want to go from open tracing to open telemetry, all that stuff. So we're starting to think about these more advanced users to have something that provides value for everyone out there in the field. But we need to get priorities from the field, and that's why we are trying to set up this user group and try to involve as many consulting, vendor, even end organizations to tell us what are their pains in the end.
Well, and I was going to say is, one of the good responses in an open source community, right, is, hey, we're taking pull requests. Like, what I like about trying to do this experience group, right, is, at least have that group start to focus on, how do I make a contribution if I want to do that thing, right? Whatever it is, as well as kind of gathering requirements. But is there also a way to kind of say, hey, if you are interested in doing these things, here's where you can plug them in so that you can go off and do them yourself, and that's totally fine. We'll take the pull request, but that your team isn't focused on that because you're focused on the big 800-pound gorilla problem rather than the smaller monkey problems that are off to the side. Because I think you may get random contributions there that because people will be interested in solving their individual use case. So I really like the idea that you're kind of trying to establish an organization, or not an organization, but like a group or a focus group or discussion section or whatever you want to call it, around that topic.
I would say someone telling us what they need or how they solve something could be as valuable, and some source code, some modules, some this, some that. That thing is so we are building a platform to somehow automate knowledge and knowledge gathering, but we still need that knowledge in a way that can be used by this a knowledge automation engine. And the knowledge itself is the most valuable part of what we're building.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting. I think this is kind of one of those long running problems of we even used to do this development around trying to migrate from like Rails 6 to Rails 7. There's a lot of challenges around doing these migrations. And and I think it's dangerous to simplify them into things like lift and shift versus versus re-architecture versus whatever. So a lot of the time it's kind of per application what you want to really do, and if we can kind of give the end user the opportunity to really actually consider what they want to do for any individual scenario, it makes a lot of difference. So I know we have a lot of other things we wanted to talk about. I will ask our customary question though, because I do want to hit it real quick. But Ramon and John, because we've heard the answer from Savitha, but what brought you to open source, and or what brought you to Kubernetes in the first place? But then after that, we should probably wrap because we're starting to run out of time. John, I'm gonna hit you first.
Sure, mine's easy. I was an undergrad, and a professor needed help with something. He introduced me to Beowulf clusters, and that's the
Nice.
first time I got to install Linux at home, and I was amazed by it. And then it was just I fell in love with the whole thing where if something was broken, I could try to learn it. Maybe I couldn't fix it, but once in a while I got lucky, and that just kind of created a spark inside of me. That was a long time ago, but it stayed.
That's awesome. And what about you, Ramon?
My case, I would say it's kind of different. I come from a consulting background, so I've been more in the enterprise side of things. But working on Red Hat, that's part of our DNA. But that's kind of that aligns kind of with what I was discussing with you before, this user group. So trying to bring this knowledge that has been laying in the consulting enterprise side of things and make it an open source asset that others can benefit from. I think that's a pretty interesting angle that I haven't seen exploited in open source before. So we're trying to transform that knowledge that has been on the enterprise space for a while into an open source asset that can be shared across multiple organizations. So I'm in love with the open source model.
Nice. I also wanted to point out that I interviewed, I think, both of you, Ramon and John, and maybe somebody else on the Level Up Hour multiple years ago now. And so if you want to go see how far the project has come, you can go watch that wicked old episode. I was trying to find it. I'm pretty sure it's from 2020, right?
Might be.
You want to check it out. But thank you so much for your time. I think we ran out of time a little bit today from some technical difficulties, and I think that means that we're going to have you back in a few months or whatever, and we're going to expect all the language server stuff to be done, some of those AI components,
Yep.
of course WASM integration, and we'll just have this little checklist that we'll expect for you to show us when you come back the next time.
Hopefully,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks
Thank
for
you
having us,
having
guys.
us. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.